Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. And today we have the return of Deadpool's Diner. I'd say 2.0, but it's just 2. It's Deadpool's Diner 2. There's no 0.0 required because they didn't change anything with this mode as far as I can tell. Yeah, I was waiting for the release to see if they, maybe made some improvements or changes based on some of the pretty negative feedback from the community that was given the first time around for this mode. And it seems that has not happened. It seems that has not happened at all. So yeah, if you weren't around for the first round of Deadpool's Diner, the TLDR on it is Snap, but with higher betting stakes. You have these bubs instead of cubes, and earning the bubs gets you these rewards. The rewards are earned cumulatively, so losing your bubs doesn't detract from this. Gaining them just punches it upward, and there are a variety of different rewards here, including cosmetics, a new card, King Eitri, which I'm sure is what most people are going to be after in this mode, as well as some resources here like tokens and credits and various cosmetics ranging from borders to variants and all this other stuff. That is all very similar, if not exactly the same as it was last time around, and the bub system seems to be the same too. So you have a set amount of bubs here. Those will regenerate over time. It takes an hour to fully regenerate your bub cap. As you level up, you'll get access to different bub caps and bub marts, where you can spend resources to refill your bubs instantly, which I would recommend pretty much nobody doing, but I'm sure some people will do it regardless. But yeah, it's the same as it was before. You bet your bubs, you move up through these different higher stakes to bet more of them, to get further, to get more rewards, so on and so forth. Doesn't seem like anything has really changed here. I'm pretty sure the numbers are the same too. Someone could check and see if that's 100% correct, but from what I remember from last time around, these numbers do look the same. I think they just changed the names of them to be differently themed because we're now going into Thanksgiving instead of the summertime. So yeah, if you're curious to see, hey, did they improve Deadpool's Diner? Did they make any changes? Was that feedback heard and acted on? It looks like the answer is a resounding no. It is the same thing it was last time. So if you liked it, great, you'll probably have some fun. And if you didn't like it, well, there's probably not going to be anything different happening there, unless the pure reason you didn't like it was because you just didn't enjoy playing the game at the time, because those who were around for it might remember Arsham absolutely was dominating the game at the time, and they very conveniently locked the best counter card for it behind the Diner. So if there's one thing Diner has going for it this time around, it's that we are in pretty objectively a much more varied meta compared to the first time around, which I think was one of the worst metas you could possibly have for a mode that is all about being able to make reads on your opponent and know when it's smart to double down versus not risk it all. Okay, so I have a lot of decks here, 13 decks in fact, and one of the things, like I said before, that is probably a lot better than the first time we had around with the Diner, is the fact that the metagame is significantly less dog shit than it was when Diner came out. And I think that is in part what led to the negative reception. Definitely not the only thing. I think there are a lot of valid critiques and complaints about Deadpool's Diner, but when Arsham was by far and away the best deck in the game, it makes a mode all about snapping and retreating significantly more terrible. Which, I mean, if you play a lot of Conquest, that experience is still pretty ongoing. I don't think the Diner will be fully insulated from it. In fact, Arsham's one of the decks I'm going to suggest on here, but I don't think you can argue that it is better positioned than it was during the first time around, when the deck was significantly more powerful and people had less options for solid counterplay. And right now, honestly, the metagame is fairly diverse. There are a lot of different decks that are having success that all succeed for different reasons, doing different things. In terms of recent memory, this is actually one of the most diverse metagames I think I can personally remember, which should bode well for a format like this, where people don't feel quite as pigeonholed into one specific deck. With that out of the way, let's talk a bit about some of the decks. I'm going to try and keep it relatively brief because, like I said, there are 13 decks here, and I don't want this to be a super duper long video. So let's talk about the decks and what they do. First up is Moon Monkey. This was popularized by Derek, high ladder player, good player. Strong deck, very strong deck. The idea with this one is pretty simple. We use Hope Summers, Moon Girl, and Gwenpool to buff up our hand, duplicate our hand, and then pop off with Black Swan, making all of our 1-drops free, using one or multiple She-Hulks and Hitmonkeys to have a massive point swing going into the final turn of the game. Sunspot and Kitty Pryde give us ways to soak up energy and get value out of that, given we're not usually doing a whole lot of other stuff on the early turns outside of playing our curve out if we have it in Black Swan, Hope, Moon Girl / Gwenpool. And then Shadow King is the flex spot. It's there as the tech card of choice to deal with a bunch of the other scaling decks. Could also be another 1-drop if you'd find yourself not really running into things that are scaling upwards where you need Shadow King. I think that is definitely the flex spot, but it is probably the most powerful tech card this deck has access to. Then we have Thanos Lockjaw. This is a deck I have played a ton of since the Thanos buff, and I'm a pretty big fan of it. The idea with this one is you're just trying to cheat out a bunch of big dudes using a Lockjaw or other ramp mechanics such as Psylocke and Hope Summers. Has a lot of big heavy hitters that can put a bunch of points on the board while also interacting with your opponent's cards via moving them around with Magneto and Arrow, or just turning them off entirely with Alioth. One of the most common powerful play patterns this deck has access to is using Psylocke and Black Swan in order to enable being able to throw your stones away into the Lockjaw as early as turn 4. You can ramp out Lockjaw on turn 3 with Psylocke, or you can play Jaw on turn 4 with an activated Black Swan in order to start dumping those stones right away, or on a later turn when you otherwise want to be using that stone mana energy for your other big high impact cards. Arrow and Mobius are 100% the flex spots in this deck. Mobius was a tech against a bunch of the stuff I was seeing, namely the Scar stuff, and he did a pretty good job there, but you could also change that up. If you're seeing a lot of Shang-Chi, Kyra could go in that spot. If you just want another big dude, Surtur could go in that spot. That is definitely the most flexible spot in the deck. And then Arrow could also be another 5 or 6-drop. It could be a Devil Dino. It could be a Scar, since we have a lot of other 10s. You just want it to be a big thing. But I have actually found Arrow to outperform my expectations, so I'm definitely leaving her in there personally. But yeah, if you want to play Thanos, this has definitely been the Thanos list that I have found the most fun and success with, and I think it will be pretty solid in the diner. Next up, we have a Anti-Venom Malekith mid-range deck featuring Onslaught and Ultron. This is another one of the decks that I built a little bit ago upon Malekith's release and ended up having a lot of success with it. I think Anti-Venom naturally gives decks like this a huge edge in games where, you know, the snapping is more important, because it creates a lot of unpredictable outcomes in terms of like these big 5 or 6 cost threats that you can slam alongside another big threat because of that Anti-Venom cost reduction. And then Malekith also does some powerful things there too, in terms of being able to just get a lot of stats on the board or help us pull out a key card like a Shadow King, Patriot, Luke Cage, or just some stat sticks, which is very efficient for the 4-drop slot, which traditionally has always been a weak slot in the curve for these Ultron-style decks. Now with Malekith and Anti-Venom, it feels like maybe the strongest slot in these decks, if not like close to it. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You do a lot of strong ongoing stuff, and you also have Ultron to enable going wide. Big fan of this deck. If you like playing Ultron stuff, I would highly recommend it. Then we have Surtur. This deck got nerfed. A lot of people stopped playing it. Turns out it's still really good. Not much else to say about it, right? You play big stats. You play Surtur on 3. You play an assortment of 4/10s. You don't have to play Arrow. Some people prefer playing another 1-drop, which I think is also fine. Like Nico or Squirrel Girl, or there's like Nico or Squirrel Girl or the Hood. There's a long list of them. I've liked Arrow, so I continue to play Arrow, but in general, this deck kind of builds itself. You have ways to interact with your opponent with like Juggernaut and Cosmo. You can protect your big threats from Shang, and you just put out a lot of numbers. Simple, straightforward, easy. If you're more of a move enjoyer, the move your opponent's cards Scream deck is still really good as well. Probably not as popular as it was a little bit ago, but still very, very strong, and the list hasn't really changed too much. I know some people have preferred trying out the lower curve version with Daredevil and Shang-Chi and stuff, but personally, I am not super sold on that one compared to this list. From everything I've seen, this is still far and away the best way to play the move your opponent's cards archetype, which admittedly is carried pretty hard by the power of Scream. Bounce is good too. This is another one where Agent Venom got nerfed. People started playing it less as a result, even though it's still a really good deck. I mean, that's just kind of what happens, right? Nerf card syndrome is a real thing. But if you like playing Bounce, I think this is still a very solid way to do it. You could go a different direction than the Mysterio Hitmonkey stuff. That's kind of a personal preference, but I think Mysterio is still very strong with Agent Venom, even if it's not quite as massive as it used to be. And the card is still all upside except for Beast in this deck, while also letting you play 2/5 on turn 2, which is always a strong thing to be doing. So yeah, if you like Bounce, not a bad way to go at all with the Bounce Hitmonkey stuff. If you like saying no to your opponent, Control Sarah just got a new tool in Fenris Wolf, and though I don't think you need it to play the archetype, or that it's going to be like super archetype defining, it's no doubt not a bad card to add into the list. Traditionally, Sarah has always had this weird dynamic with cards like Mysterio and US Agent and Shadow King, where it wants to run all these 2-drops, but most of these 2-drops it doesn't want to play on turn 2. And that is one thing Fenris has a bit of upside on, is the fact that you do just want to play this card on turn 2 because you need to get it down so you can activate it. And you have a whole slew of control cards to help deal with the threats your opponent is putting out on the board. Killmonger, Shang-Chi, Red Guardian, US Agent, just a lot of ways to interact with your opponent's cards, and it is very easy to adjust this deck to your own little pocket meta depending on what you are seeing more of. Arshem. What's there to say about Arshem that hasn't already been said? This card is a hotly debated card, especially right now, but where there is no debate on this card is the fact that it gives you an edge in terms of information, and it is really hard to snap into for a lot of players, which naturally is going to make it a very powerful contender in the diner, much like the first time diner came around. You run a million tech cards, you run Quinjet and Loki for cheaper cards, you run a bunch of big threats that either do something impactful or put big points on the board, or both, and then you scam your opponent with random cards. It's a good deck, and the power of Arshem honestly carries it hard enough to where you can make a pretty budget version of it. Probably still succeed even if you don't have some of these other powerful pool 5 cards. Then we have Move. So there are a few different versions of the Move deck going around right now. There's another one where it's a bit more bounce-centric, which I think is also pretty decent but harder to play. But this is the most popular and I think most successful Move deck, just using all of these good move tools with some control elements of Cosmo and Eliath to either stop what the opponent is trying to do, or at the very least just keep them guessing in terms of, where that Cosmo is going to be because of Madam Web, or are they going to Eliath me or Heimdall me? It puts the opponents in pretty tricky situations a lot of the time, having to make a coin flip judgment call that if they don't get right, the game often does not go their way. So yeah, I think a lot of people aren't the greatest at playing Move, and a lot of people don't like playing Move. So if you're one of those people, it's probably not for you, but if you are a Move enjoyer, you really can't go wrong with this version of it. I also wanted to include a bit more on the budget-friendly stuff here. These aren't decks that I think are the best decks by any means, but they're not bad, and they are probably more accessible to the wider player base. Starting out with Discard, really the main cards you need here of the higher series are Proxima and MODOK. Scorn and Mink are very easily replaceable with a variety of other cards, but Proxima and MODOK are the heavy hitters here. You can put out a lot of numbers. Discard's kind of a weird deck in that it's generally pretty face up, and what I mean by that is it is very obvious when your opponent is doing well with Discard because you see the Apocalypse, you see the discard happening, you see the swarms. You generally know when they're doing the thing, but for whatever reason, a lot of people underestimate this archetype. I think that's in part because it was bad for a very long time, but it's really not that bad right now. especially if you do have access to Scorn, who has given it a little bit more of a power bump. There are other versions of it floating around as well. I've seen some with like Malekith and Gambit. You can adjust it as you see fit. This is just the version I have seen having quite a bit of success. But yeah, adjust it as you see fit for some budget options if necessary, but discard, fine way to go for a bit more budget focused deck. And the same is true of Destroy. Destroy is also a more budget deck. You know, it's one of those decks that people have had for a long time and hasn't really changed too much. Now it's running Agony instead of Hulkbuster. If you don't have Agony, you can just throw Hulkbuster back in there, and you could always put in like Shang in the Zola spot depending on what you're running into. But generally speaking, this has been the Destroy list for a very long time, and that is unlikely to change, and it's probably a more than fine deck to play, even if, like Discard, it's not necessarily the top meta deck around. Then we have Ajax Affliction. I think the Ajax deck has become a bit less popular, mainly because Luke Cage is kind of at an all-time high, or at least he was recently with the release of Anti-Venom and Malekith. Luke Cage stocks are just higher than they've ever been, but the deck is still good, even with Luke Cage being around. Malekith and Anti-Venom added extra power and unpredictability to it that it was previously lacking a little bit of, so I don't think you can really go wrong with that if Affliction is more your style of play. And last but not least, we have a Wiccan deck. This is one I played the other night to quite a bit of a success using the Fenris Wolf package. So Fenris Wolf and a few different ways to destroy things to get some value out of it with like Negasonic, Gladiator, Shang-Chi. But to be honest, most of these Wiccan decks look exactly the same. It's just a handful of cards that get changed out. They run Quicksilver, they run 3 to 4 2-drops, a few 3s, Alioth, Magneto, Wiccan, and then a 4 or a 5-drop. There are a lot of different variations on this deck, but the core of it is the same. Build it however you want. This is a way I found success with it, but it is very much a modular kind of deck where you can take out a lot of like the middle of it or adjust the middle of it as long as you're keeping the curve the same, and you'll still probably find a lot of success with it. And yeah, that is our Deadpool's Diner decks and overview. I hope this video provided some useful information to you, namely in the deck stuff, because that was the bulk of it since Diner hasn't changed very much. I'm very curious to hear what you think about Deadpool's Diner. Did you like it the first time around, and are you excited for it to come back? Did you not like it the first time around, and are you not excited for it to come back? What would you like to see change, and why? I would like to hear it. That's going to wrap it up for this one, though. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.